Hey, I want to talk to you quick about A class, B class, and C class properties. And we want to talk about the pros and cons of those properties. And today I'm going to focus on C class, and I'll be focusing on different classes as we go through the week. So, C class properties, first of all, what are they? They're 1970s and older typically. They might have a little bit higher crime, but the income levels of the tenants are on the lower third of the income scale in the city. I'm differentiating C from D. A lot of people fail to do that, and that's a big mistake when people. A lot of people classify D class, and D class is going to be your low income, but it's going to be your very high crime property. So that's going to be the difference between D and C. So we're talking about pros and cons of C class properties. Again, there's 1970s and older, but I'm talking C class neighborhoods too. So C class neighborhoods can have a mixture of, maybe even 2008 built properties, 2010 built properties, or brand new. But for the most part, it's those older properties. So one thing I hear a lot of people say, and I think it's a mistake. It's an opinion, but I think it's a mistake. Is that C-class properties? We're going to be lasting through this recession with C-class properties, and they're the best because, right, your A-class people, they move down. They go from A-class down to B-class, and then B-class go from B-class to C-class, and C-class, well, they've got nowhere to go, so they're going to stay in C-class. Well, I think that's a big mistake because here's what happens. When a recession happens, who loses their job? A lot of people lose their job, but the biggest kind of sector that is forced out of their job, or maybe goes from 40 to 50 hours a week where they can afford rent, down to like 32 hours, maybe even lower, are going to be your construction workers. They're going to be your manufacturing companies. They're going to be all the labor kind of industries. Those are the first ones to get cut, the janitor staff, and those are the people that are in your C-class properties. And now I would say, if you look back at the history of these recessions and what happens, B-class tenants tend not to move down to C-class properties. What ends up happening with the A's and the B's, instead of moving down, what they do is they move over, or move with each other. Okay, so they stay in a B, but instead of moving into a C, they're going to just room up with somebody, right? And that's going to keep them in that property. So in my opinion, C-class properties are still going to struggle in any recession. Just like they did in the last recession, the recession before that, they're still going to struggle. So that's one con, is in an economy, they tend to have higher vacancy rates. They tend to have tenants that aren't paying your rent. And you're going to have to either make a choice. You're going to evict them, or you're going to leave them in the property and make payments and try to just continue them, down the road. So that's going to be definitely a con. Vacancy rates typically go up. Economic occupancy is a big thing. That typically, your economic occupancy goes down. C-class, what else? Well, let's stick with the cons since we're already there. Another con of C-class properties are typically it's higher crime. Sometimes you've got a lot more maintenance. Most of the time, you've got a lot more maintenance on these older buildings. I've experienced it a lot myself on these older buildings, 1970s and older. Things last a certain amount of time, right? When we get to be 40 or 50, we start needing replacement hips. Well, that's what happens with our property. Our property starts needing replacement hips. And that's the C-class property. We have things like, I've got a C-class property right now, and it had a water line in the middle of the street just burst, right? It flooded 4 units. Well, that's a big expense. We had to fix the water line. We had to then fix all the 4 units that flooded. We had a gas line underground crack. We had to dig up the dirt and replace that gas line. Things like that tend to happen in these older properties, and there's just nothing you can do about it. So that's definitely a con. High maintenance expenses, and you're not going to get away with that. I think the other con is management's a little harder. You've got just tenants that maybe are lower income. Not that they're all bad people, because some of them are amazing people, but it just happens that you have, I think, tenants that have a harder time affording the rent, and they end up moving out, and move outs just cause damage and problems. There is definitely a little bit more crime a lot of times on C-class properties. Now, there's two types of C-class properties as well. There's your C-class with a little bit higher crime, and then I do think there's a lot of C-class that have very low crime, but are just lower income people. Now, let's talk about the pros of C-Class. Well, a lot of times we can buy them for a discount, right? Because they are a little harder to manage. They do have that bigger maintenance. And so some people just can't manage them. They let them go. And so we do have opportunity. Those are the biggest properties, I would say, that have probably slumlords involved in them. So sometimes we can take a property that, I shouldn't maybe call them slumlords, but you know, the mom and pop, or just the person that doesn't care as much sometimes about the property. I feel like they oftentimes hang on to those C-class properties, and we have the opportunity to really make a difference because we've got tenants in there that don't deserve to live in a bad place. So we have an opportunity to make a difference, really add some value, and potentially get a really great deal on a C-class. So that's definitely a pro on C-class properties. The other thing is, if you want to help out with rent affordability, buying C-class properties, you have a good chance of helping out with the rent affordability crisis that we have going on right now. You can serve that. You know, I think probably the biggest pro overall, though, is economically, there's a good chance you can make more money with C-class as far as cash flow goes than you can with A and B class. I think the appreciation tends to be a little lower, but the cash on cash returns, the cash flow tends to be a little bit higher. How about you give me your reasons? Why do you like C-class properties? What do you think is good? What do you think is bad? I want to hear from you as well, because there's definitely more pros and cons that I could continue with. I'm sweating like crazy because I just got back from a run, so I gotta shut this down. But I want to hear, what do you think? What are pros and cons on C-class properties? We're going to talk about B-class tomorrow, and then we'll talk about A-class probably on Saturday, maybe on Monday.